Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. So you've also heard of Inspections Commissioner Bai Xiao? He kills people without batting an eyelid. He's vicious and merciless, and a complete madman. He's a self-proclaimed wife stealer who cheats his superiors and defrauds his subordinates. Everyone says that he's an unabashed brown-noser who even managed to hoodwink the giant ghost king. He's very skilled with shakedowns, to the point where he doesn't even leave the grass behind. He's shaken down 18 clans in the Arch-Emperor dynasty, and is so ruthless everyone hates him. He's a complete villain who cultivates an evil technique that absorbs life force. You can find people all over the place in Arch-Emperor City who had life force stolen away by him. According to the stories which were spreading through the wildlands, this Bai Xiao was a person who was wicked beyond redemption. In fact, in many of the savage tribes, his name was a very effective tool used to frighten naughty children. As for Bai Xiaochun, he didn't really care at all about that. However, his apprentice did. Bai Xiao would occasionally go out into the city, thanks to the infinite shape-shifting abilities that came with being a ghost cultivator. Furthermore, since he was acting as Bai Xiaochun's sole slave, he could go out and about without attracting any attention, as long as he maintained a stiff appearance. Besides, Bai Xiaochun had arranged for him to be escorted by corpse troopers wherever he went, and therefore, no one ever dared to cause problems for him. Bai Xiaochun's flame conjuring was a very expensive thing. Even with everything he had acquired in the shakedowns, he still couldn't sustain the work for too long. After all, each attempt required 10 tongues of 17-colored flame. As such, both Bai Xiao and Zhou Yixing would often go out to acquire more souls for him to use. It was because of such frequent outings that Bai Xiao continued to hear more and more stories with his name in them. From what he could tell, his master really was ruining his name. Furthermore, many of the rumors were the type that got Bai Xiao worried about potential dangers. As for Bai Xiaochun, as his resources drained away, he became more and more confident with 18-colored flame. In fact, he was fairly certain that with only a few more sessions of practice, he would succeed. He was actually starting to get anxious, and was worrying about the same dangers that Bai Xiao had already begun to worry about. After all, he had behaved with complete madness on the day of ancestral sacrifices, to the point where it clearly put him in a position of extreme danger. Before, he had been a sharp knife wielded by the Grand Heaven Master, and had thus benefited from his protection. But now, the Grand Heaven Master was at the peak of power, and had suppressed everyone. Therefore, the position of Inspections Commissioner wasn't as important anymore, and would in fact soon be unnecessary. When the world was at peace, there was no need for razor-sharp knives. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but worry that the Grand Heaven Master would eventually just discard him to earn back favor with the nobility and aristocracy. Thankfully, Bai Xiaochun and Bai Xiao had discussed the matter, and both agreed that, considering the level of his cultivation base, no matter how great the danger he faced, there was one way he could save himself. And that was, to become an earthly necromancer. By becoming an earthly necromancer at just the right moment, he could definitely get out of even the most difficult situation. However, he thought, both Hauer and I agree that the Grand Heaven Master probably won't get rid of me anytime soon. Maybe I'm just reading into things too deeply. Maybe the Grand Heaven Master will continue to approve of me more because of everything I've done. Besides, even Hauer thinks that his attitude might change soon. After all, I was very careful to make sure that 90% of what I acquired in the shakedowns was sent to him. I refuse to believe that doing all that didn't make an impression on him. Although those heavenly marquis clans weren't rich enough to fund the entire nation, they were still fabulously wealthy. With that, he looked down at the tongue of fire he held in his hand. All of that will be what I rely on for protection. Maybe nothing will happen, but if there is even the slightest sign of danger, I can rely on the ruthless plan Hauer came up with. That plan could buy me some time, but it really is ruthlessly harmful. Although I don't care too much about my reputation here, it would be best to avoid it if at all possible. However, if the Grand Heaven Master forces my hand, then I'll have no other choice but to do it. Taking a deep breath to still his thoughts, he continued with his flame conjuring. Even as Bai Xiaochun was worrying about potential danger, and doing everything he could to succeed with 18-colored flame, a pair of eyes like those of a viper had come to focus on Bai Xiao. Certain forces had begun to gather every bit of information they could about him, and at the moment, a meeting was taking place somewhere in Arch-Emperor City, in an unassuming private chamber. The soul has no name, but is always at Bai Xiao's side. The investigation in Giant Ghost City has concluded, and nobody knows where the soul came from. The first time anyone saw it was in Bai Hao's spirit enhancement shop. It looks stiff and numb, like ordinary soul slaves usually do. There were 13 shadowy figures floated within the darkness of the private chamber. It was impossible to see their features clearly, but all of them were gazing steadily at a person who sat in the very middle of them all. She was a beautiful young woman, and she was currently revealing all of the information gleaned from recent investigations into the soul form Bai Hao. If Bai Xiaochun were here, he would immediately recognize this young woman. She was Miao Liner. She had fought Bai Xiaochun back in the necromancer kettle, and had also plotted against him after he arrived in Archemperor City. However, none of her plotting had come to fruition so far. After Bai Hao became the inspections commissioner, the soul disappeared from public view, and remained heavily guarded inside the inspections manor. No one was able to get any information about it. However, during the past 3 months, the soul has been seen out in the city more often. Normally, it is acting on the orders of Bai Hao to purchase souls. It was last seen 3 days ago. According to our calculations, that soul will appear at least one more time during the next 2 weeks. However, it is always escorted by at least 100 corpse troopers. It's the same with Zhou Yixing. Miao Liner spoke slowly and clearly so that everything she said was very easy to understand. Furthermore, she was no longer dressed in the revealing way she had been before, but rather, more modestly. Therefore, I suggest that we make our move the next time that soul appears out in the open. With that, she clasped hands and bowed to the 13 shadowy figures. The 13 figures remained silent for a long moment before one of them spoke. Are you sure that this soul is actually intelligent? If so, how intelligent? Has it been merely putting on an act to fool outsiders? Without the slightest hesitation, Miao Liner replied, although I've only personally seen the soul a few times, I am absolutely certain. Another protracted silence followed, after which another of the shadowy figures spoke in a raspy voice. This soul slave of the mad dog Bai Hao is obviously very important to him. Therefore, you need to be absolutely certain that it can be used to conjure 18-colored flame. Miao Liner didn't respond at first. Instead, she produced 13 bone slips from her bag of holding, which she sent flying to the 13 shadowy figures. After catching the jade slips, the shadowy figures studied their contents, and then soon, their eyes began to shine brightly. Clearly, the information they were seeing confirmed the answer to the question that had just been posed. With that, Miao Liner went on, to our clan, the most important factor to consider in 18-colored flame is the flame spark. With the flame spark, my grandfather can rise to the rank of earthly necromancer. Only after that point would he be able to conjure 18-colored flame without the use of this type of soul. Seniors, I can guarantee that all of you will get the formula for 18-colored flame afterward. In fact, my grandfather will even swear a Tao oath to that effect. Seniors, clearly you can see that Bai Hao's days are numbered. The only reason the Grand Heaven Master is still hesitating about him is that he hasn't found the right opportunity. In any case, that doesn't matter. Bai Hao is already a toothless tiger. If he can't rein himself in, then we won't need to do anything. We just need to add a bit of fuel to the fire, and the Grand Heaven Master will definitely kill him to appease the masses. At that point, Bai Hao's reign of terror will finally be over. Smiling faintly, Miao Liner looked around at the silent figures and said, what the Grand Heaven Master wants now is stability. Furthermore, what need would he have to get rid of people who have outlived their usefulness, if those people are already dead? Miao Liner wasn't feeling anxious at all as she stood waiting for a response. She was extremely confident, and was sure that nothing unexpected would happen in the plan. The truth was that she hadn't paid much attention to the soul form Bai Hao. Because of the powers of Bai Xiaochun's mask, Bai Hao had always looked like any other soul slave would. It was only when he and Bai Xiaochun were alone together that he would show any signs of being alive. However, something had happened during the flame conjuring competition with Sun Yifan and Sima Dao. In the moment that Bai Xiaochun created a faint 18-colored flame, Bai Hao had been so emotional that not even the protection of Bai Xiaochun's mask had been able to conceal it. In that moment, Miao Liner had looked over and noticed the change to his facial expression. Furthermore, the technique she cultivated had something to do with souls, which made her even more perceptive than the average cultivator in that regard. Miao Liner did not belong to the clan of a heavenly marquis, but rather, a heavenly duke. Furthermore, her clan had once given rise to an earthly necromancer. The earthly necromancer who had risen up in Miao Liner's clan had long since perished. However, before that, he had been spectacularly famous, and had only been half a step away from becoming a heavenly necromancer. Before his death, he had managed to create a magical device linked to the bloodline of the clan, which made it impossible for anyone outside of the clan to acquire their formula for 18 or 19 colored flame. Not even a demigod would be able to acquire them without their consent. Therefore, the good fortunes of the clan continued even after the death of that earthly necromancer. Although they had experienced something of a decline, they still had their reserve savings. Furthermore, Miao Liner's grandfather was already at the peak of the celestial rank. His main goal was to rise from the celestial rank to the earthly rank, and then restore the glory which had been brought to the clan by that earlier earthly necromancer. Their clan would shake the wildlands, and would have a position higher than the clans with heavenly marquises and dukes. They would actually be on the same standing as the Grand Heavenmaster. Unfortunately, their clan's method for reaching the earthly necromancer rank was unique, and required a very intelligent soul to use as the primary ingredient. Only in that way could the requisite flame spark be created. Because of that, and because of the technique cultivated by the clan as a whole, they were particularly sensitive to the fluctuations of souls. Unfortunately, intelligent souls were a rarity. Although their clan had managed to produce some throughout the years, none of them were perfect. Without a soul that met all the standards, any attempts to make 18-colored flame would be useless. After Miao Liner noticed something different about the soul form Bai Hao, she had immediately notified her grandfather. That prompted the clan to do more careful tests, whereupon it was confirmed that Bai Hao was exactly the type of soul they needed to make their flame spark. Were it not for Bai Xiaochun himself, Miao Liner's clan would already have made a move and snatched Bai Hao. Later, Bai Xiaochun skyrocketed to the position of inspections commissioner and shook everything under heaven. At that point, they didn't dare to provoke him and simply bided their time. But now, they saw the perfect opportunity. Although they still feared Bai Xiaochun, their desire to have an earthly necromancer pushed them to make a decision. They spared no cost to propose an alliance with 13 other clans within Archemperor City. They had showered them with gifts and even offered to swear a Dao oath to make it happen. With the full power of the alliance focused together, they were sure that they could spirit Bai Hao away without leaving a trace of evidence. At this point in the meeting, Miao Liner felt more confident than ever. Some time passed, during which the 13 shadowy figures took more time to think. Then, one by one, they swore Dao oaths and placed them into the bone slips, formalizing the alliance. Miao Liner smiled a beautiful smile, then clasped hands and bowed. Excellent. The next time that soul appears, we'll make our move. According to the strategy put in place by my grandfather, we will plan for the worst-case scenario. After we have the soul, our clan members will scatter and go into hiding in your 13 clans. 3 months later, my grandfather will be able to conjure the flame spark. And now, I'll take my leave. With that, she gave a curtsying bow, turned, and glided out of the private chamber. Actually, Miao Liner was of the opinion that her grandfather was being too careful in all of this. Not even she had any idea where he would go into hiding after the clan dispersed. She didn't even know who the 13 clans were that she had just been speaking to. Well, as long as grandfather is confident in being able to prevent the other clans from backstabbing us, then I guess we should be fine. Although she couldn't quite wrap her mind around what her grandfather was thinking, she was sure that Bai Xiaochun's days were numbered and that he would soon be dead. Half a month flew by in the briefest of moments. Bai Xiaochun was now only a short step away from successfully conjuring an 18-colored flame. His speed in progress was thanks in part to the extravagant wastage of resources, but also because Bai Xiaochun had begun to apply Bai Hao's theories to the formulas of everything from 15-colored flame and above. That made things go even more smoothly. Most importantly, he had already succeeded with a very faint 18-colored flame during the competition with Sun Yifan and Sima Dao. Because of that, he was able to save a huge amount of time. This time, I'm definitely going to succeed, he thought excitedly, his hair in disarray and his eyes bloodshot. He had hardly rested at all during the past several months, but he was still in extremely high spirits. It has to work. I've wasted virtually all of the resources from all of those clans. After this current attempt, I'll only have enough for 2 more tries. During the recent period of intense work, Bai Hao and Zhou Yixing had been very busy selling items from Bai Xiaochun's bag of holding and using the profits to get more souls. In fact, both of them were currently outside, gathering the ingredients he needed for his final batches. Bai Xiaochun took a very deep breath, closed his eyes, and then settled his qi and cleared his mind. After a long moment passed, he slapped his bag of holding and produced 10 17-colored flames. Immediately, his hands flew out to either side, flashing with incantation gestures. At this point, all of his concentration was focused on the 10 tongues of 17-colored flame, as he so slowly began to merge them together. He had already attempted to do this on several occasions, and was quite familiar with the process. Gradually, the 10 tongues of flame transformed into a sea of fire. Incredible levels of heat rolled off of it, although it was contained within a 300-meter area. Anything beyond that wasn't affected at all. That was a trick Bai Xiaochun had come up with during his many sessions of practice. And now, it's time to start compressing it. He unleashed the power of his cultivation base and focused his divine sense. Nothing else in the world mattered to him in this moment. He was completely focused on compressing that 17-colored sea of fire. Rumble. His secluded meditation facilities shook as the power being exerted onto the 17-colored sea of fire caused it to start shrinking down. From 300 meters down to 270 meters. Then 240 meters, 210 meters, 180 meters. And it kept going. Beads of sweat popped out on Bai Xiaochun's forehead, and he began to pant from the exertion. The fluctuations of his divine sense were somewhat disorderly, and yet, the sea of fire continued to shrink down. Soon it was 150 meters. Then 120 meters, 90 meters. This was where I failed so many times before, he thought, working hard to maintain full focus. Soon, the sea of fire had shrunk down to 60 meters. And things weren't over yet. 45 meters. 30 meters, 15 meters. By this point, the 17-colored sea of fire seemed like the sovereign of all types of fire. Intense rumbling sounds echoed out, and the fire leapt and danced as though it didn't wish to be constrained. However, all of the explosive activity was limited to that 15-meter area. As the shrinking continued, shocking transformations were beginning to occur. The fire began to burn hotter, and the 17 different colors inside of it were beginning to overlap. It was a dazzling sight that not even Bai Xiaochun's divine sense could make out clearly. Furthermore, as the 17 different colors flickered, it was possible to see another color. This is the last, critical moment, he murmured excitedly. According to the formula, it was within the 15-meter area that the 18th color would appear. It was in that all-important juncture that, despite how his vision swam, he had to locate that additional color. When he located it, he would have to lock his divine sense on it, causing that color to expand, to grow, to become the 18th color. At that point, he could make a portion of 18-colored soul medicine, or, if he compressed the flame all the way down, an 18-colored flame. He would only have one chance, and if he failed, the flame would vanish. The smaller the sea of fire got, the more slowly the colors would flicker, which would make it easier to spot and lock onto the new color. Unfortunately, he needed to exert more force to do that, which meant that the chances of dangerous instabilities were even greater. This was another point where he had often failed in the past. I can't fail again. Forcing his breathing under control, he stared at the 15-meter sea of fire and tried as hard as he could to locate the additional color. Unfortunately, every time he sent his divine sense deep into the fire, it was rebuffed. Time passed, and he was beginning to lose focus. I'll compress it more, he said with full determination. At this point, he abandoned his search efforts, and began to push the flame down to a smaller size. It was now 12 meters across, and the flickering of the colors was growing slower. The slowdown compared to the 15-meter size was minuscule. In fact, most other people wouldn't even be able to notice the difference. However, Bai Xiaochun was so focused on the sea of fire that he could immediately notice the difference. And yet, even with that change, the flickering colors within the 12-meter sea of fire were still impossible to penetrate with divine sense. Bai Xiaochun's eyes were bloodshot, and he was trembling physically from the exertion. By now, his cultivation base, his mental faculties, and his ability to shrink the sea of fire were all reaching the limit. And yet, he didn't attempt to shrink the sea of fire down again. He tried yet again to find the 18th color. Then he tried a second time, and a third time. In the short time it takes an incense stick to burn, he was able to glimpse it a total of 14 times. So, I was right. This time, things are going better. The last time, I was only able to glimpse it 9 times. This time, that number has increased to 14. His spirits were lifted. However, despite having glimpsed it clearly so many times, he still wasn't able to reach it with his divine sense. He sighed, then gritted his teeth and gave up on trying to form the 18-colored flame with a 12-meter sea of flame. Instead, he chose to shrink it down again. It was almost as if a huge pair of hands were physically pushing the sea of fire in on itself. It began to fluctuate, and even seemed to be teetering on the verge of destabilizing. Bai Xiaochun immediately adjusted his method of control, and when it stabilized, he forced it to shrink from 12 meters to 9 meters. Sweat poured down his forehead but quickly evaporated into steam thanks to the intense heat of the sea of fire. By now, Bai Xiaochun was panting nervously. Shrinking the sea of fire down to 9 meters was something he would only do if absolutely necessary. It was very draining on him mentally, and also caused the sea of fire to behave even more wildly than before. Worst of all, his numerous practice sessions had led him to the discovery that 9 meters was the absolute limit. Although it was possible to shrink the fire down to 6 meters, if he did, it would be destroyed moments later. After all of his experiments, he was fully convinced that although it was technically possible to shrink the sea of flames down to a size of 6 meters, and that doing so would slow the flickering colors so much that, if he then sent divine sense into it, the result would be the same as had occurred when he was conjuring in the presence of Sima Dao and Sun Yifan. He would create only a dim wisp, not a true flame. It was only because of the powers of his mask that, over the course of the past few months, no one had ever sensed it when he created such flame wisps. And in the end, what Bai Xiaochun wanted was, not a flame wisp, but a complete 18-colored flame. 9 is the limit, he murmured, eyes shining with focused determination. He knew that he couldn't keep going for very much longer, so he focused all of his mental faculties on searching within that sea of fire for the new flame. He did it in methodical fashion, not blindly. After the initial attempt failed, he tried a second time, then a third time. On the fourth time, when he was certain he had identified the newly added color, he unhesitatingly sent his divine sense exploding out. His eyes shone with glittering light as his divine sense fused with his vision, pierced into the 9-meter sea of fire, and latched onto the newly added color. As his divine sense merged with the new color, the color became brighter, as though it were struggling with the other 17 colors. The 9-meter sea of fire rumbled loudly as the other 17 colors fought as viciously as a nation defending against an invading army. But Bai Xiaochun was in control of everything, and refused to allow the other 17 colors to interfere. Within the shortest of moments, the 18th color grew brighter and more shocking. The entire room shook violently as the 18th color appeared in full in the 9-meter sea of fire. As of this moment, it was crystal clear that the sea of fire had risen to the level of 18-colored flame. Although it was still in the sea of fire state, all Bai Xiaochun had to do was use his flame conjuring techniques to return it to a state of flame, and that was nothing incredibly difficult. For all intents and purposes, he was now looking at an 18-colored flame. In the instant the 18th color appeared in the sea of fire, it was almost as if the fire itself had fused with heaven and earth, instantly causing drastic transformations. They were clear signs and portents pointing to the fact that an 18-colored flame had been brought into existence. Any given 18-colored flame was enough to shake all creation, and gave rise to something like heavenly tribulation. If Bai Xiaochun closed his fist down to create the actual flame, then those signs and portents would grow more intense, until visible manifestations could be seen in heaven and earth. Even now, in the sea of fire state, there were still incredible fluctuations, although they were currently being covered up by Bai Xiaochun's mask. It worked, he exclaimed, trembling. He had been waiting for this day for a very long time, had spent months doing research, had performed unending experiments, and had spent outrageous amounts of resources. And it had all been for this moment. Although his heart was going wild with excitement, he took a few deep breaths and calmed himself. Then, he began to close his fingers into a fist. The 9-meter sea of fire churned and writhed, almost as if something inside of it were screaming. As it began to shrink down into his palm, though, certain fluctuations appeared that caused him to hesitate. Those fluctuations were coming from his mask, and were an indication its powers were wavering. If that happened, and Bai Xiaochun pulled the sea of fire all the way into his palm to create an 18-colored flame, then the drastic transformations that resulted would notify everyone in Arch-Emperor City of what had occurred. And that would cause problems for his upcoming plan. 18-colored flame was one of his trump cards, and to reveal it too soon would give his enemies the chance to prepare for it. Eyes glittering, Bai Xiaochun committed every aspect of this conjuring session to memory, so that he could be completely confident in replicating it in the future. He wouldn't necessarily be able to succeed every single time, but he would at least have a 60% success rate. Considering how confident he was feeling, he had to force himself not to go ahead and take the chance and form the flame. However, he could not afford to gamble in this situation. A trump card like this was far too important. Therefore, he sighed in regret, then grabbed the sea of fire in a way that caused it to transform into a portion of soul medicine. It was something even more rare in the wild lands than 18-colored flame, supreme-grade soul medicine. In some ways, this portion of soul medicine actually did prove that Bai Xiaochun had broken through to become an earthly necromancer. He now had a higher standing than the heavenly marquises and dukes, and was someone even the Grand Heaven Master would have to treat with respect. He was one of only 4 earthly necromancers. 18 colored flame. Damn it, if it weren't for that Hell Emperor steel, I would enhance my nascent soul right now. It's been a long time since I did. That would put me right in the late nascent soul stage. However, doing that would come with other risks. Therefore, he decided to simply wait for the right moment to skyrocket to prominence in one fell swoop. It was a lot less glorious to be a powerful person who nobody knew about, and it immediately dampened some of Bai Xiaochun's excitement over being an earthly necromancer. However, at least he could tell his apprentice. Feeling very proud of himself, he drew upon his mental connection with Bai Hao to call out to him. "Apprentice, guess what, master?" However, before he could finish speaking, Bai Hao replied in an anxious voice. "Master, help em." Before he could finish speaking, it was to Bai Xiaochun's utter shock that their connection was severed. There was no possible way that Bai Xiaochun could have been prepared for the sudden and unexpected severing of his connection to his apprentice. "How?" he shouted, leaping to his feet, mind reeling with a sense of deep foreboding. There was clearly no time to ponder the situation. All of the joy about becoming an earthly necromancer was cast deep into the back of his mind, which was now filled with only one subject: Bai Hao. Without pausing for even a moment, he walked out of his secluded meditation chamber, flew up into the air above the inspections manor, and then shot with lightning-like speed in the direction he knew Bai Hao to have been in moments ago. He even resorted to teleportations, moving with dramatic speed that caused whistling sounds to echo about. He vanished in the blink of an eye, and when he reappeared, he was on a crowded street near the edge of the borough that was home to the inspections manor, which was right in the middle of the city center. It was a bustling street with many stores and countless pedestrians walking every which way. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary about the area, but Bai Xiaochun's sudden appearance, accompanied by intense rumbling sounds, caused countless people to look over in shock. Many even backed away reflexively. "It's Bai Hao, what's he doing here?" As soon as people realized who it was, they started to get nervous. After all, everyone had been talking about Bai Hao recently. Even more unsettling than his mere presence was the fact that his expression was profoundly grim, and he was even trembling physically, as if from rage. As soon as he arrived, his divine sense spread out to fill the area, and the killing intent present within it was like an angry wave that swept out in all directions. In response, countless faces fell, and many people even gasped. What's wrong with Bai Hao? Heavens, what is he going to do? What happened? Everyone was shaken by the murderous aura radiating off of Bai Xiaochun, and many of them immediately felt as if they were in danger. It was a rare thing to see him like this. At the moment, he almost seemed out of control. His heart overflowed with anxiety, concern, and self-blame, a combination which pushed him into utter madness. He looked like he was ready to unleash a bloodbath. It was with bloodshot eyes that he scanned the street, his gaze soon coming to rest on one particular shop that specialized in selling souls. However, he couldn't detect any evidence of fighting in the area, not even the fluctuations of magical techniques. There were absolutely no clues present, and yet, Bai Xiaochun was certain that this was the area from which Bai Hao had messaged him urgently. As for the 100 corpse troopers who had been assigned to protect Bai Hao, they were not harmed in any way. However, they appeared to have been tampered with in some way, as they simply stood in place unmoving. At this point, Bai Xiaochun threw his head back and let loose a howl that shook all creation. It was a hoarse cry filled with fury and madness, that swept out like a mad tempest. Corpse troopers. Instantly, the corpse troopers back in the inspections manor all shivered, and then shot toward Bai Xiaochun in beams of light, their murderous auras raging like vortexes around them. Dramatic rumbling sounds filled heaven and earth as 3,000 corpse troopers converged on Bai Xiaochun's location. Lock down this entire area. Search every person, every shop, every alley. Search everything. Find my soul slave. The 3,000 corpse troopers' eyes began to shine with red light, and their murderous auras grew more intense as they fanned out and began to follow the orders Bai Xiaochun had just issued. They even began to magically seal the entire area, including the soul cultivators, regardless of the level of their cultivation base, their background, or their status. They searched the shops, and searched the cultivators, even their bags of holding. The shop Bai Xiaochun had identified as Bai Hao's last known location was of particular focus in the investigation. Of course, everyone was infuriated, and some began to angrily protest, and even refused to cooperate. Bai Xiaochun remained in place, unmoving, seemingly not possessing any aura at all, only an intense, frigid coldness that caused frost to start to build up in the area. His face almost looked like that of a corpse, his eyes growing more bloodshot by the moment until they were almost pure red. Coupled with his disheveled hair, he looked like a devilish god. Furthermore, the murderous feeling of the icy coldness made it seem like, if this person went crazy, he could eradicate worlds. He seemed completely oblivious to the commotion, immune to the shouting. In fact, he didn't even see anything around him. He was completely wrapped up in memories. First was an image of himself teleporting into the wildlands and finding Bai Hao's corpse. Second was when he assumed Bai Hao's identity, went to the Bai clan, and found Bai Hao's notes written on the floor of his hut. Third was the necromancer kettle, when he actually found Bai Hao's soul. Fourth was when Bai Hao awoke, then kowtowed and called him master. Fifth was in the spirit enhancement shop, where the two of them had relied upon each other for survival, with Bai Hao constantly giving him advice. There was a sixth and a seventh. When he finally reached the last of the memories, his heart was as black as the night, and Bai Hao's voice rang in his ears. Master, help em. As he stood there with a blank look in his eyes, his corpse troopers were causing a huge scene as they searched the area. The commotion was growing more and more intense. What are you doing? Do you know who I am? Damn it, even if you are the inspections commissioner, you don't have the power to do this. I come from Heavenly Duke Situ's clan. How dare you search me? At one point, an old man furiously made his way through the crowd to stand in front of Bai Xiaochun. Bai Hao, I'm an honor guard from Heaven Master Manor. If you want to go crazy, fine. I can't believe you're using your corpse trooper army like this all because of a soul slave. I'm definitely going to report this to the Grand Heaven Master. Let me go immediately so that I can return to Heaven Master Manor. Other people feared the inspections manor, but this old man was a member of the Heaven Master Manor. As far as he was concerned, the inspections manor was nothing more than an attack dog used by the Grand Heaven Master. Heaven Master Manor was indeed a very special place. It was actually the clan of the Grand Heaven Master, and this so-called honor guard was essentially a personal attendant of the Grand Heaven Master. Even as the old man was yelling angrily, Bai Xiaochun looked up, and without saying even a single word, stepped forward and punched him right in the chest. It happened so quickly and suddenly that the old man couldn't even react. Bai Xiaochun possessed battle prowess equivalent to a half-diva, power which completely overwhelmed this honor guard from Heaven Master Manor. A miserable shriek erupted from his mouth, followed by a stream of blood. He flew backward like a kite with its string cut, and before he could even land, the power of the fist strike caused him to explode into bits. A rain of blood and gore then descended onto the city. Everyone was completely shocked by the sight, and looked over incredulously at Bai Xiaochun. That old man had been from the Heaven Master Manor. And yet Bai Xiaochun had killed him without uttering a single word. If anyone resists, kill them immediately, he said in a hoarse, cold voice that echoed out for everyone to hear. No one dared to offer any further resistance. It was at this point that Zhou Yixing finally arrived, just in time to see the old man getting killed. Then he looked around at the army of corpse troopers, and finally at Bai Xiaochun. The expression on Bai Xiaochun's face instantly struck fear into his heart. He had never seen him like this before. My lord, he began. Before he could say anything else, Bai Xiaochun looked over and cut him off. Find my soul slave. His gaze caused Zhou Yixing's mind to reel, and even fill him with intense coldness. Without any hesitation, he joined the search effort. The search didn't last for long. The corpse troopers were like fiendish monsters, who demanded cooperation even if it wasn't offered. Before long, all of the shops had been thoroughly searched, as had all the people. Zhou Yixing's efforts were particularly speedy and thorough. Because of all the shakedowns he had participated in, he was able to leave virtually no stone unturned. Soon, the corpse troopers began to check in. Nothing here, no clues at all, nobody here. After all 3,000 corpse troopers gave their reports, Zhou Yixing nervously approached Bai Xiaochun, lowered his voice, and said, My lord, we weren't able to find any clues at all. We checked all the shops and all the people. Nobody even saw that soul. We looked especially closely at those shops over there. The more Zhou Yixing spoke, the softer his voice got, until he trailed off nervously and bowed his head. As of this moment, all of the happiness and glory that Bai Xiaochun had felt were gone, replaced by intense coldness and bitter madness. And of course, he blamed himself. His best guess was that someone had come to suspect his identity, and had taken Bai Hao in an attempt to get evidence. He also felt guilty. If he hadn't been so distracted and negligent, he wouldn't have failed to provide Bai Hao with sufficient protection. Most bitter of all was the realization that if he hadn't been so immersed in flame conjuring, he wouldn't have needed to send Bai Hao out to get souls. My apprentice has done so much for me. Bai Xiaochun's heart hurt, and it was impossible to keep his emotions under control. He could not comfort himself, and could not even breathe steadily. It was very obvious that this was not just some random misunderstanding, and yet, he had no idea who exactly was targeting him. With that, he took out his Inspections Manor Command Medallion and used its special ability to check the records of Arch-Emperor City going back several months. However, no amount of searching produced any clues. The Inspections Manor had access to all of the intelligence reports in the entire city, and yet, he found nothing helpful. After all, the Inspections Manor would usually have clues build up after an event occurred, and Bai Hao had gone missing only moments ago. If the Inspections Manor did manage to get some clues, they would likely filter in through reports that would come in days later. But Bai Xiaochun couldn't wait that long. Every breath of time that passed was a moment of danger for Bai Hao, and Bai Xiaochun knew that if he didn't rescue him, he would live in regret for the rest of his days. Anxiety rising to maddening levels, Bai Xiaochun gritted his teeth and took out a transmission jade slip. For the first time since becoming the Inspections Commissioner, he took the initiative to contact the Giant Ghost King. It wasn't that he hadn't thought to do so on previous occasions, or that he couldn't. It was just that, as the Inspections Commissioner working directly for the Grand Heaven Master, it wasn't very appropriate for the two of them to have dealings. After all, the Heavenly Kings and the Grand Heaven Master weren't exactly on good terms. However, he had never forgotten the feelings that had grown between them. And right now, Bai Xiaochun didn't care about the detriment of direct contact with the Giant Ghost King. The events that had played out were too strange, and Bai Xiaochun simply couldn't come up with any ideas about what might have happened. And for some reason, he had the feeling that considering not a single scrap of a clue had been left behind, he needed the help of someone with the experience and cultivation base of the Giant Ghost King. A demigod. Back in the royal palace in Giant Ghost City, the Giant Ghost King was currently dining with Mrs. Chen. Even as the two of them laughed and chatted, he suddenly frowned and pulled out a jade slip. Snorting, he transmitted his voice into the jade slip. Well, if it isn't the exalted Inspections Commissioner Bai Hao. What could possibly have caused you to think of me today? If you have something important to say, spit it the hell out. Your Highness, I've run into some trouble. As soon as Bai Xiaochun's hoarse, maddened voice reached the ears of the Giant Ghost King, his jaw dropped, and his expression turned serious. Calm down, you little brat. What happened? Tell me everything. As the Giant Ghost King listened, his eyes began to glow, and intense pressure began to radiate off of him. Gradually, he rose to his feet and walked out onto a balcony overlooking the palace. A grim look could be seen in his eyes as he stood there for a moment, and then responded to Bai Xiaochun. No evidence, no fluctuations, no clues. Those three facts alone are very telling. I know what happened. A demigod made a move against you. It seems unlikely that it would be the Grand Heaven Master. After all, if he wanted to do something to you, he wouldn't do so in such a complicated way. He could just wave his hand. However, considering that you're in Arch-Emperor City, the fact that the deed was done with such seamless perfection indicates that it wasn't just the work of a demigod. There must have been multiple clans working together to provide support. That would be the only way to do it without leaving behind even the slightest evidence or clue. Bai Hao, you've offended so many people that I don't think even I can figure out who was behind it. But at the moment, the more you get involved in this situation, the worse it's going to get. You're a smart person, Hao. Why don't you just come back to Giant Ghost City? Leave that nest of vipers. Let's see who would dare to plot against you with me around. Not once during his little speech did the Giant Ghost King ask why this particular soul slave was so important to Bai Xiaochun, or who the soul slave was. He had no desire to know, and actually felt that being left in the dark about the matter was the best thing. The Giant Ghost King's message caused a warm feeling to rise up in Bai Xiaochun's heart. However, he knew that if he went back to Giant Ghost City, that it would cause the hatred of all the nobility and aristocracy to fall upon the Giant Ghost King himself. That was something he didn't want to happen. Furthermore, he couldn't just accept the fact that Bai Hao had gone missing. In fact, his killing intent only continued to grow stronger, and the intense coldness around him more biting. Hang in there, Hao, he said in his heart. I don't care what storms arise because of it. Master is going to find you. He swore this oath with the last bit of warmth that existed in his heart, after which it turned completely ice cold. I don't care who did this, even if it's a demigod. When I find out who it is, I'm going to exterminate their entire clan. Without the slightest hesitation, he flew up into the air, followed by his corpse trooper army and Zhou Yixing. His destination was the Imperial Palace. Considering that this was a matter which affected all of Arch-Emperor City, the only person who could truly resolve it was the Grand Heaven Master. Although Bai Xiaochun knew that the Grand Heaven Master's stance toward him had changed recently, and that the inspection's manner was actually relatively weak within the power structure, he currently had no other alternatives. The Grand Heaven Master treated me well in the past. Perhaps all the things I worried about before are unfounded. Maybe he doesn't really want to get rid of me. A blood-colored glow could be seen in his eyes as he shot at top speed through the city toward the Imperial Palace. Upon arrival, he left most of the corpse troopers outside, and only took his quasi-diva realm guard with him as he headed toward Heaven Master Hall. As of this moment, only 2 hours had passed since his connection to Bai Hao had been severed. Most of that time had been wasted while the corpse troopers performed their search. Even still, Bai Xiaochun was reacting about as fast as was possible. The Grand Heaven Master wasn't alone in Heaven Master Hall. He was joined by 8 other individuals, who were seated in front of him, respectful expressions on their faces as they talked in low tones. 2 of them were heavenly dukes, with one being Chen Haosong, and the other a middle-aged man with a beautiful, flowing beard. Behind those 2 were 6 heavenly marquises. Currently, the person speaking to the Grand Heaven Master was none other than the beautifully bearded man. Grand Heaven Master, the sects from the Heavenspan region have been particularly active this year. They've been building up forces along all 4 sections of the Great Wall. According to the clues we've unearthed, and the information provided by our spies, we are certain that the Celestial from Heavenspan Island is preparing for an assault the likes of which comes around only once in 1,000 years. It was in this moment that Bai Xiaochun requested to see the Grand Heaven Master. The request was granted, and Bai Xiaochun entered the hall and stood off to the side. As for the bearded man, he glanced briefly at Bai Xiaochun, and the continued speaking to the Grand Heaven Master. Although the 4 heavenly kings have their mission to defend the borderlands, they can do more than just be a passive threat. They can actively cast fear into the hearts of the enemy. I would like to propose placing more emphasis on watching all 4 sections of the Great Wall. Furthermore, your humble servant hereby requests to go to the front lines on the northern section of the Great Wall to offer military consultation. The Grand Heaven Master didn't respond at first. Instead, he looked over at Bai Xiaochun, whose murderous aura and bloodshot eyes made him seem very different from usual. The Grand Heaven Master's brow furrowed. Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.